Hi everyone, welcome back. Hope you enjoyed the break and thanks again to LSEG for sponsoring. To kick off our second half of this morning's session, we'll start with a financial crime compliance panel, which will be moderated by Rachel Woolley, Head of Financial Crime Regulation at Palantir Technologies. So I'll hand you over to Rachel and the panelists. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you to everybody for joining. So we're going to be talking about financial crime and innovative strategies to detect and prevent financial crime. I want to speak as little as possible, so I'm going to hand over in a second to our esteemed panelists for their introductions. Just a quick introduction to myself. So as mentioned, I'm head of financial crime regulation at Palantir Technologies and also the chair of the Financial Crime Compliance Working Group at the Compliance Institute. With that, I'm going to hand over to Tony, Simon and Sarah to give their introductions and also to give us their perspective on the current landscape in the financial crime industry. Tony, over to you.
Hi, good morning, everyone. Tony Cahalan, Central Bank of Ireland, working in the Central Bank for the last 10 years, mostly around financial crime prevention, but also working on transformation in the Central Bank at the moment in relation to some of the work we're doing around integration and a restructure. And then into next year, I'll be working again in financial crime. So very happy to be here. I've led a program recently in the bank on the transformation of AML and financial crime more generally from a supervisory and regulatory perspective. So I think the panel today and the discussion is very, very apt in relation to that work. So lovely to be here.
Thanks so much, Tony.
Hello, everyone. My name is Simon McFeely. I'm here as a independent advisor and consultant. I've recently just left the industry where I've held roles as Chief Compliance Officer and Chief Risk Officer, particularly in the payments and fintech space, for over 10 years in global payments. And we're trying to do something a bit different to help startups and fintechs. I think what's really interesting, Rachel, and we had some discussion around some points earlier on, was, okay, we spoke about maybe a data protection officer later on in the day, or we spoke about sustainability. We talked about, consumer protection and how that's changing, and there are different elements of compliance. I think, this panel's all about AML, so we're talking about the AML compliance guy here, right? And I think one of the threats that we need to consider, like, of course, we have market threats like fraud and other types of typologies, but let's talk about internal threats for a second. The cost of compliance is going up, right? It's a fact. Okay, DORA is going to cost businesses more. PSD3 is going to increase the cost of doing business. And firms need to balance their priorities. And there's been a lot of focus on AML, all over the world for 10, 15 plus years. And I think there's going to be more pressure on AML compliance officers by the CFO to say, hey, what are you doing, with your organization? How can you bring in innovation? I've heard about this thing called a co-pilot in AI. How are you helping? Hey, your guys are wasting their time. They're out there smoking. I think they're going to come under these kind of threats. So I think it's something that, compliance officers in the AML space really need to look into themselves and think about what the next generation of actually fighting crime means. And hopefully we'll get to touch on some of those aspects today.
Great. Thank you, Simon. And Sarah?
Hello, everyone. So my name is Sarah Sinclair. So I started a business called ChangeGap 4 years ago after 30 years in industry, so working in banking, insurance, asset management, and lately fintech. So we actually came to market to be a RegTech vendor and then thought again. Although our specialist area was prudential regulatory reporting, we just kept getting asked over and over again, can you help with financial crime? Whether that was a multinational banking group trying to align all their policies and standards to, excuse me, a group standard and, cross jurisdiction regulations, or it could be a small fintech saying there's 600, AML solutions out there. Where do we start? So I think, this is a really important topic today, and just want to quote LexisNexis report actually that said in the UK 38.3 billion pounds was spent in the UK on financial crime compliance. And if you look at each individual firm, whether you're a small 10-person firm or someone like Schroders, the cost of compliance is just not sustainable. We all know that technology is going to play an increasingly important role, but there's a huge gap in terms of capability, understanding, trust, and that's both on the regulator side and the regulated firm side. How do we approach that gap? Technology is too expensive, but where do we start? So I'm really looking forward to this panel.
Thank you, Sarah. And Tony, I might come back to you for your perspective on the the landscape overall, just to give you that opportunity.
Yeah, so in relation to the financial crime prevention landscape and the financial crime risk landscape, for me, and I think many of us in the central bank, we're very struck by the extent and pace of change. So the change, as you all know, is just been so rapid over the last 5 to 10 years. I started working in central bank 10 years ago on financial crime, and what we were looking at then and what we're looking at now is just very, very different. So what's driving that from a regulatory perspective? What's driving that in financial services? Well, there's two things that are pretty much driving it. The first is around technological innovation and digitalization, consumer preferences, and how financial services are marketed and accessed by the end user. That's absolutely and utterly changed how a regulator and supervisor has to look at it. And then secondly, business model. So the extent of change in industry. So 5 years ago, 10 years ago, well, certainly 10 years ago, I know I wasn't using my mobile phone to do the amount that I do today. And that's just one very simple example. So as business models change, incumbents get challenged by fintech and challengers. That, from a financial crime perspective, changes the risk landscape, because the way in which end users are accessing financial services is very different. So gone is the day of the person going into the branch and maybe, sorry, there is an element of that, but less and less that the person goes in to be onboarded in person, and it's more on digital platforms. And I should say, it's not to say that that's a negative. Obviously, in the central bank, we very much welcome innovation. We very much welcome this change because there's huge opportunities and benefits. But the landscape for financial crime professionals, including financial crime professionals in a regulatory authority, is very different today. So how do we harness technology? How do we understand technology and harness technology? And the last thing I'll say is, because I very much believe we're at the foothill of a technological revolution. I think if you look at the last number of years, and I was thinking about this recently, most in this room are probably born in the 1970s and 1980s. Did anyone ever envisage, or maybe you did, maybe I just didn't envisage, that we would have this little box in our pocket in 2024, and this little box in our pocket would do so much. So just imagine what technology is going to do for our children in 20, 30 years time. So as financial crime specialists, criminals are exploiting this today, and it's not the fault of anyone in particular, I would say, but the controls that we have in place aren't fit for purpose. The rules have to keep pace with the change, and that's the real challenge for us all.
Yeah, absolutely. It's some great comments there, actually. And I think, just to add a quick comment, I think we're at this crossroads where the ability to leverage technology is I guess, a double-edged sword. But from my sort of biased perspective in a vendor, this is probably the best opportunity we've ever had to, whether we can get ahead of the criminals or at least keep pace for the first time ever. Because we're constantly just chasing our tail, right? And it kind of brings me into the first question that I have is, how do we deal with the evolution of financial crime trends? So, everyone is probably focused, on emerging fraud threats. Money muling has been in the news quite a lot in the last couple of years. And then I think it was last week, there was someone arrested in Dublin for possession of gold. So how do we make sure that we're not forgetting about the typical or the old school methods, but still kind of pushing forward to collect or to catch those more complex money laundering schemes and yeah, God forbid, terrorist financing schemes?
Yeah, well, maybe I'll take that one.
Sure.
And picking up a little bit what Tony mentioned, I think, around the pace of evolution in AI and all this moving super, super quick. But I think there's still a lot of firms out there, not only in Ireland, but abroad as well, still don't have the basics right around customer risk assessment, business risk assessment. I think that's come back to the point, Rachel, you're talking about there, is they haven't mapped out their risks. They don't understand how to bring in, intelligence into that. I think something like PSD3, for those in the room in the payment space, I'd start to take a look into PSD3, and that's going to bring some good opportunities, hopefully. I think around information sharing, particularly around fraud. I think in some ways it's a little bit of a disgrace, unfortunately, that fraud has gotten so out of control that the UK regulator and the European regulators now are actually going to have to start mandating certain things to actually happen, which is obviously good for the consumer, right? Because it's absolutely out of control at the moment. It's insane. And these aren't necessarily like, you know, kind of evolving kind of techniques. When some of this is just basic stuff that's happening and people are getting caught by fraud. So I really hope in 3, 4, 5 years time, we get to see, you know, less of that fraud, or certainly better ways to detect and protect our family, our communities and our businesses. But, you know, if you're a firm and you're looking at your risk assessment and you're kind of scratching your head, you know, you're at risk of being left behind, because I think eventually over the next couple of years, maybe from a regulatory perspective or supervision perspective, they're going to see other firms using technology in better ways of working in a more effective way. And that expectation bar actually goes up then, right, naturally. So again, I think it's important just for AML compliance officers to just take stock, see where you're at, see where you're spending your time, see where your investment is going, you know, and map out a journey, how you actually do better for the future over the next 2 to 3 years.
Yeah, it kind of, I suppose, building the foundation and getting the basics right, and then build from there, right?
Yeah.
Sarah?
Yeah, so I think it's really important to balance the conversation around, you know, technology, but all the other aspects that need to be invested in and, you know, brought to bear. So from the sustainability panel, I really like that one of the closing comments around the convergence of frameworks, because whilst that is important, and we can you know, reference the equivalent on the regulatory side. We've got, sorry, so many different regulations and rules, and, you know, many of them are overlapping. But ultimately, the things you need to do as a business are relatively simple. Okay, so you need to identify your risks and then your policies and controls and so on. And that will be the same regardless of whether there's 1 or 1,000 regulations. So I think there needs to be a focus on that, and, you know, tools, business tools that firms can use. And I think that's only going to come from there being more sharing and collaboration across the industry. There's some really basic things that everybody needs. Why should every bank or you know, broker firm or, you know, financial services firm create these things from scratch? Why are they still interpreting the regulations, you know, from the PDF to a set of obligations and then going all the way through? So I'm a real tech advocate, but equally the conversations that, you know, we have or I hear going on in firms looking to embrace technology is, well, what about the operating model? What are the teams in the first line, second line and third line going to do once the technology is in? And that's where I think it's really good that there's more sandboxes, tech sprints, you know, more innovation from regulators and other, you know, bodies across the industry. So I think somehow we need to find time to invest in those and learn collectively.
100%. And Tony, before I come to you very quickly, I think that's an incredibly valuable point, is that how do we know what everybody is doing? That's, you know, the left hand isn't talking to the right hand within organizations, never mind from one bank to the next. And that's probably something that you have really good visibility on.
Well, it's not unique to industry. I think anyone who's worked in any organization probably knows that sometimes the left and right hand can go in different directions and not always speak to one another. But just to go back to the earlier point, just to balance also what I said in relation to technology, when we were devising in the central bank our own strategy, our broader strategy around regulation and central banking, we came up with 4 themes, and there was a lot of debate around the 4 themes. And one of the themes is future focus. So that's anticipating change and responding to change and being able to enable change and innovation. So that's all very important. So being future focused. But another one of the themes was the safeguarding theme, which is we need to be careful both in industry and also as a regulator that you're not spending all your time looking at the future and then today the risks are passing you by. So I think that's quite obvious, but it's trying to get that balance between doing the job today with the tools that we have today, but also anticipating the changes. So in relation to that, what I would say, like from a supervisor's perspective, we're adopting a phased approach as to how we evolve and change. But I would say that industry too, particularly, you know, medium and maybe smaller size firms, the cost outlay to actually be able to do compliance in a way that's utilizing technology will be more limited than maybe more the sophisticated entities. So we need to be very balanced in our approach as a supervisor when we look at how compliance is being executed. We also have to be very pragmatic that it will be a phased approach, both from a supervisory perspective, but also from an industry perspective. But the one thing I am very clear in my own mind about is the direction of travel is that a lot of transaction monitoring, a lot of actually what the compliance tasks are today will evolve and change quite radically, but there will still always be the overlay of human judgment. And actually one thing that's been said to me recently about transformation is, if you look back in history, transformation generally makes people's lives better, generally makes people's jobs more interesting. So maybe some of the more mundane manual tasks that are done today in compliance, once that gets automated, it allows you as a compliance professional to focus on far more interesting work about emerging risks or threats. So in relation to, just very briefly, in relation to the collaboration, and I actually saw, maybe I shouldn't bring it up because I'm probably prompting the question, but I did see some commentary in the Sunday papers in relation to some of the challenges around collaboration. Derva Rowland, Deputy Governor in Central Bank, was out last week, and some of you may have been at that event where she spoke about Article 75 and the AML regulation that talks about private-to-private collaboration. Very much what we see as the EU legislative package is bringing in a mechanism to maybe encourage and foster more collaboration. Of course, we understand as a central bank, there is also data protection and privacy requirements as well. And that is a balance that I know I've been on panels for the last 10 years speaking about. It is trying to get the balance right between privacy and transparency around AML and data protection. But to Rachel's point, the left hand and the right hand, you know, being more joined up, more coherent, is all about information sharing, whether it's within an organization or it's between private to private or it's between public to public or public to private. So hopefully that helps.
I think it's figuring out the right relationships and the right strategic partnerships, I guess, to find, embrace, manage, etc., and figure out how far we can go with that. Which brings us to the next question about innovation. So it brings exciting opportunities, but that also comes with challenges as well. So, you know, what are the kind of innovative capabilities or opportunities that might exist? And to Tony's point, I definitely don't miss having to manually copy passports and proofs of address and so on and make sure they're all tagged properly. And I'm sure nobody in this room does either. And there are some really, dare I say it, really cool things that you can do with technology now that gets us that bit closer to actually defeating financial crime.
Yeah, I did that.
Yep.
So one thing I've enjoyed the last many years was now is looking at right tech solutions. And one of it just because I think it's super interesting, but you're always thinking as well, you know, how can we incorporate this into our solution as a payments firm or whatever it may be. And there's one particular, a lot of talk out there around, you know, digital onboarding, lots of talk around, you know, use of machine learning and AI. And I think it can be quite, this goes back to skill sets as well as investment. It can be quite difficult, I think, if you're a compliance officer in a small or medium firm who's maybe been tasked with finding the right solution for us. You know, maybe, you know, we're thinking 2 years ahead. But there's certainly one that I spent some time with to go through the product and actually done some testing around it, which kind of picks up on Tony's point around this concept of a co-pilot. Right, so it's more around, again, if you have Spotify, for example, Spotify is kind of picking out songs maybe you wouldn't necessarily find, or I can start my own business. I'm using, you know, AI for helping to design business cards and websites, and it's fantastic. I never used it before. So this kind of idea of a co-pilot. So what that could look like in a type of a role of a sanctions officer, of a, you know, a CDD analyst, and you know, how can it be used in a way that's also not that black box? I think that's very important, and that's what I think was very interesting when I saw this particular software. It's called Greenlight. I know we're affiliated, based in the US, but they've full audit trail. So as the, you know, co-pilot is doing whatever it's doing, you know, in the background, you can actually see all the steps in the code. Yeah. So it's, again, how do we, you know, find these in this big haystack? How do we convince our CFOs that we need to spend 100 grand a year on this stuff? Okay, and then how do we actually implement it in a proper way so that we don't get our ass kicked on the CBI saying, what's this? Yeah. You know, so I think it's about just governance and again, thinking, get the basics right around change management. If you are implementing a financial accounting system, you know, you'll have to have really strict change management controls, you know, and testing, etc. So I don't see why the compliance team can't learn from those types of basic principles as well?
Before I move on to the next person, very often what I see is that, and be careful how I say this because I've worked for vendors for the last 7 years, but very often solutions are being built in a vacuum, that the compliance officers aren't actually being brought into these conversations at the right point in time. So I'm kind of, it's a call to action, I guess, for anybody in the room that has an opportunity to be involved in contributing to a solution or contributing to the implementation of a solution, and not just being kind of brought in to okay it at the last second, because that doesn't work for anybody, but exploring and learning what is possible, what is capable. Sarah?
Yeah, I think there's a huge gap in the market at the moment for kind of more long-term adaptable solutions. So there's a lot of solutions out there, and you might onboard them, but then what happens next year when the rules change or the data requirements change and so on. So there needs to be a way of the industry working together to, as Simon says, not just do it for the company you work for, but across the industry, so others can benefit. And so whether that's a standard that's brought in across the industry, there probably a space for benchmarking, rather than us all coming up with our sort of top 10 questions to ask the vendor. The same questions need to really be asked. But if you're not used to using technology, then how do you know those questions? So a lot of opportunity and need, for that type of sharing. I think the good news is now, so even looking back 2 years ago, we ran a working group around collaboration saying there needs to be more. Now, I think we're on the verge of maybe too much. So then the next challenge is, how do we harness that? How do we make sure that what comes out of the collaborative groups or coalitions is of benefit to the many, those who don't have time to be part of those, or there might be another reason for not being involved. So sometimes consortiums or coalitions are about a handful of top firms getting together. I could be pessimistic and say they just want to sort of make sure that they're okay, but even if they're doing it for the right reasons, still the benefits aren't going to the many. And as an industry, especially where we want and need to see more competition and positive disruption, I think that's a real case in point.
Yeah.
So just on innovation, for fear that you all here today are looking up at the panel and there's a central bank attendee who's just talking in the abstract about technology and innovation and how it's great. I just want to give you some specifics about what we're doing, which is a pitch to you to kind of embrace maybe an opportunity that the bank has rolled out. So for most of you, you're probably aware in the financial crime space that we've just launched a sandbox program. Since 2018, the central bank has been running an innovation hub, and we concluded a consultation early this year around how we could improve and enhance how we engage on innovation, but also in relation to a sandbox concept. So over the summer, it was decided that the bank would run its first program focused on financial crime, and in particular around fostering and developing solutions around fraud and AML/CFT frameworks. So this is about, from the central bank's perspective, about helping innovators go through solutions and understand what the regulatory expectations are. So that program has launched. I think both Derval and Sharon Donnery were out last week in relation to the application process. You have until the end of October to apply. The successful applicants then will commence the program in December, and it'll run for 6 months. There's a number of elements to the program. The first is there will be workshops on a monthly basis with the central bank, and it'll be about going through the solutions being developed and support around that. There'll also be a dedicated relationship manager per applicant as they go through the process, and then there'll also be access to our own data center in relation to it. So for us, it's very exciting because we're trying to understand better how financial crime solutions can improve both the understanding of the risks, but also the measures to mitigate those risks. So for us as a central bank, as a regulator, we'll get a lot out of it, but we're hoping that also industry participants are going to get a huge amount out of it as well. So I would encourage anyone who is involved in the development of a technology solution around financial crime to go onto our central bank website. We've a lot of detail up there as to how to apply and some of the questions that may come up as you're going through that process. So that's just one example, but we also are very interested in hearing from you separately in relation to innovation, and we would have held roundtables over the last year or so. We plan in 2025 to hold more roundtables, not just on innovation, but generally around change in financial services. So thanks, Rich.
Thank you so much. Yeah, there's some really incredible opportunities, I guess, to build or be involved in the building. And maybe just a very quick call to action from my perspective, having moved from the compliance world to the technology world. There's so many tools available now that you don't need to have to, be able to code or to learn a new language and so on. And honestly, from my experience, the very best people to build these types of solutions are sitting in this room. And so definitely worth looking up to see the criteria and how you can get involved, and finding the right people to work with, whether that's myself. I'm sure you don't want to get too involved in the day-to-day, but myself, Simon, Sarah, I'm sure would be very open to having conversations. If think of your wish list, if only you could solve this challenge that you currently have, and see can you make it happen.
Can I come in, Rich? One point, and again, it's just something I've seen across the industry, and again, it is kind of payments and fintech, but I think it applies to financial crime, right? Onboarding a client is onboarding a client. And I've seen companies that have gone on this journey. They brought in a digital onboarding solution, for example, or they've brought in a much better way to detect suspicious activity or potentially suspicious activity, and there can be an over reliance on that. So I mean, there is, and again, in certain markets and in certain areas, this idea of auto KYC. It works depending on some business models, but again, this concept of co-pilot, is critical, and making sure that you do have, again, through your risk assessment, either when you're bringing in the product or through your business, your customer risk assessment, but in your overall risk assessment product, is making sure you have those hurdles, because it is, as much as we want to embrace the innovation, I think the vast people in this room will have this kind of this gut check I always talk about, right? I can look at a website and in 10 seconds I know it's a fraud. Okay, but if I have a junior analyst and it's been outsourced to Bulgaria, Romania, or India, he's working on a procedure. So it's really trying to get that balance. Because again, going back to the fraud, I mean, I've seen cases where competitors have onboarded a particular client, and then the fraudster will go shopping with the competitors as well, and we've been able to stop them. And it's purely because we've built in those human controls on top of those advanced technologies that we're using in terms of onboarding or ongoing due diligence. So again, it's a balancing act that we just got to manage as we're going through this revolution, I would say, going back to Tony's point, over the next couple of years.
Yeah, and some of it comes down to actually sharing of those ideas or sharing of that wish list. Like I learn about new things my company's doing on a daily basis. It's not something that I work with on a daily basis, but I'm like, wow, that's cool. I didn't know we could do that. And then I start to think about how it could apply in a financial crime context, and on it goes. And so maybe just to wrap up with our last question, and then hopefully we'll have a few minutes for questions from the floor. But I guess in terms of ensuring confidence, not only when you're introducing a new system, but on an ongoing basis, any thoughts or suggestions in terms of the compliance perspective on that, I guess?
Yeah, quickly, I would say it's data management. Okay. I think there's over-reliance on third parties. APIs can break, and how do you proactively detect those breakdowns in APIs?
Yeah.
How do you know those APIs and those third-party vendors aren't a black box in themselves, and they're just a lot of orchestration layers out there? So do you really understand who's your end processor of your data? I think that's super important. We almost need to ensure that usually in IT department in a fintech, they'll be looking at website performance and internal kind of whatever it is, CRMs and what's happening. But you need that team that's looking at your compliance systems as well, because if you go down and your sanction screening is gone, you need to have those circuit breakers to turn that flow off very quickly.
Yeah.
Or else you're in trouble. So again, it's just a new way of applying existing business techniques, but more on the compliance lens as we start to see these bigger investments and technologies been driven into organizations.
Yeah, I think which is the point that Tony made a few minutes ago about having that human in the loop process, that yes, you can do all of these really cool things with technology, but you still need the subject matter experts to make sure it's working and it's, you know, doing what it needs to do, basically. Sarah, any other?
Yeah, I think a lot of it is about communication and providing an environment across your organisation and with your, you know, internal and external stakeholders about, you know, what the technology is there to do, what you need it to do, and it may not do everything you want it to do on day one, but if you've got a good partner in your vendor, you know, they should be excited to work with you to really optimise the benefits. But you know, communication is key because not everyone in an organisation is a fan of tech. But you know, with the right roadmap, you can slowly convert them. And you know, too often there's a criticism about compliance just happening in a department or technology decisions just happening in technology. But you really need that cross organisation buy-in. You know, the chief financial officer, chief risk officer. Everyone needs to be excited and you know, to have that trust built from day one. And you know, in terms of building confidence, I think, you know, a couple of things. Start with your eyes wide open and continue. So expect the unexpected, because you know, technology solutions don't tend to just switch on and everything's fine. You really do need that human in the loop, and it needs everyone to ask questions. So I was at a talk about AI and someone said, think about a 6-year-old. You know, the question is, you know, it's always why? But I think that's a very good, you know, thing, you know, to think about in terms of technology. Don't assume it's all going to be okay and really test it. Yeah.
I think that's a good trait of a compliance officer, right? Just keep asking why.
Mm.
Tony, any other thoughts?
It's just back to something you said in response a few minutes ago when you said if there's questions, come to panelists, but maybe not me. But actually, and I think you were being very kind there to. But actually, we can't at the central bank say we want to foster and develop solutions and then be closed to questions around fostering and developing solutions. So it may not be me personally, because I probably am not the best person to talk to about technology, but certainly we want to see innovative solutions. So it is about engagement. It's engagement two-way, both from the central bank, from a financial crime perspective, and into us from yourselves. So that's in a nutshell what I would look for is kind of don't be too afraid of contacting the central bank in relation to innovation. I think we do want to hear about what's going on and in ways we can help.
And I think as an industry, we sort of do want to break the mold, right? We need to do something radical. Someone mentioned on the previous panel about, you know, find the higher purpose in this, and it's the exact same for financial crime. I'll try share a link somewhere, but there's a really excellent video that Palantir is involved in a project with the National Centre for Missing and Exploited Children. If anyone wants the link, let me know and I'll share it. But you know, find what it is that's important about this entire industry. What is it that we're actually trying to tackle? With that, I said I'd try not to speak very much, and I've probably spoken more than anybody, so I'm going to shut up now. Do we have any questions from the floor? We probably have time for a couple.
Can you hear me? Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, so we have a question from a member joining online, Ursula Hanafi, for the panel. Any ideas on how you can get clients to engage with a request to update CDD, either with or without a tech solution?
I don't know. I'm not allowed to say bribery, so I'm not going to say that.
I'm happy to take this for a second. I mean, it's very, very difficult. I think first of all, again, if I was the business guy here, I'd be really pressure testing my compliance guy to make sure I even need to update this CDD. You know, there's lots of talk around, for example, passports going out of date, and these, you know, can we use other ways to verify? There are some really good innovative solutions. I mean, for example, there's a bank in the UK that's kind of done a spin-off payments business, and they're using, instead of like kind of give me your utility bill, it's more, this is the mobile phone, so don't pick it up, but you know, use your geolocation on your phone.
Yeah.
Are you at your address? And can I use third-party sources to verify that address?
Yeah.
And then from a fraud perspective, if that was a money mule, for example, you know, and the phone's been accessed from Benin, you know, what do they have? So I think first of all, it's really pressure testing to see, you know, do we actually need to do this CDD? I think we also have to be very mindful of the previous discussions around, you know, consumers and, you know, how we deal with them. There was talk about, the bank and the changeover from it, an exit from the bank, and that went really well. My experience went really, really bad actually, because I actually had the loan moved. So I think it's really how you're messaging to your consumers. What's your roadmap? What's your again, putting your customer at the center of this project. I mean, or a lot of firms just take the blunt approach. It depends on your business model and where you're at. If you don't give me your CDD in 90 days, we're shutting you down.
And potentially facing a report, right? Because it sometimes, depending on the context, is an indicator
Yeah,
of
exactly.
illicit
And
activity.
it could be on the back of a regulatory finding, So I think there's no one answer. I would say is try do it business friendly, but meeting the expectations and trying to use, again, if you're retail, is really think about those vulnerable customers and different ways to contact them on that journey.
Yeah.
So that's mine.
Thank you, Simon. Any other thoughts on that, or do we have time for one more question? The CDD is always a tricky one because it's just admin no one wants to do, right? As a consumer.
Yeah, and it's going to be again something in the future we may see. I think I suppose wrapping this up, the future of it, an identity.
Yeah.
There's talk in Australia. There's just there's talk in Europe. I've seen in the UK as well about like a digital ID that we can actually use. So maybe in the future we'll start to see just easier ways to engage with public and private services through a digital ID. Yeah.
We'll have to come back in 20 years' time and figure out what the equivalent of the box in your pocket, or however Tony described it. I think that's about all we have time for, but thank you so much to such a wonderful panel and for all the excellent thoughts and thought-provoking insights. And thank you to everybody for listening. Not that you had a choice, you were in the room, so here we are. Thank you.
Thank you, Rachel and panel. I think it's very interesting to note that the challenge of change is permeating even in well-established areas like financial crime compliance, and great to see CBI engagement with firms on their tech solutions in this space. And just to reiterate Tony's encouragement for anyone who can get involved in contributing to that sandbox initiative on financial crime, to just take a look at the CBI website for more information and to sign up to participate. Now in a change of format, I've been joined on stage by Dermot White, who is going to join us in conversation with Catherine Vaughan. Dermot is Managing Director, EMEA Client Asset and Depositor Protection Oversight Office with Citi, and Catherine is Partner Global Financial Crime and Global Compliance Leader Risk Management at Ernst & Young and a leading voice on DEIB. So I'll hand you over now to Dermot and Catherine to start the conversation.
Thank you, Anya. And I'm glad you didn't continue on with whatever my role is today, because I'm not clear as to how I identify my day-to-day role. And I think that neatly brings us on to the conversation we're going to have shortly. Diversity and inclusion means a lot of different things to a lot of different people. To me, it can touch on ethnicity, sexual orientation, can be diversity of thought. Why am I an advocate for it? And why am I a senior sponsor within the Pride Committee in Citi? And importantly, pronouns he, him, his. The reason behind that is when I was growing up, I probably struggled as to how I identified. Did I identify within the, shall we say, the sports population in school as a conventional jock? Or did I fit into a category as a maths geek, right? So I really, really struggled with that in terms of an organization. So one of the reasons why I wanted to do this with Catherine today is I want to ensure that we're focusing on the outcome, as Jerry Cross touched on earlier. And for me, that's about creating an environment, regardless of what way diversity touches our organizations. It's an environment that's safe and enables us to be ourselves, to share our views, to challenge the norm, and drive the right standard and support and help our organizations. That's my thoughts, but Catherine, over to you. What does it mean to you, diversity inclusion, personally and professionally?
All of the above, and thank you, Dermot, for having me. I think one of the most important elements of feeling comfortable and being able to speak in an environment like this is feeling at home. And you have to do that in very many ways. And quite often when I talk around DE&I, my first apology is to tell everybody I'm very sorry, but I work in compliance. I don't have to do that today. So I feel very at home. And that's really important for me because I feel a connection with each and every one of you in this room, which means that if we weren't here to talk about diversity and inclusion, I could talk about my day job, my specialist subject, with people who are like-minded and understand and aren't going to judge. And that's exactly what DE&I is, regardless of the topic of the day and the purpose of bringing people together. It's about bringing everybody who is in that room into the conversation and into the solution and the outcomes. On a personal level, it means that I can go about my day-to-day life as a gay woman in Ireland, English by background, dyslexic, woman working in a predominantly male environment, and all my many facets of my diversity, everything that makes me me, it means I can go through my life feeling safe, confident, comfortable, but most importantly, it feels like I can achieve my full potential in a way that I'm not judged, I'm not criticized, and that I'm not scared to do that. So unashamedly, on a personal level, that's why diversity and inclusion is important to me.
Thank you, Catherine. You're obviously a very well-respected global leader in compliance. I'm interested in hearing more about how that influenced your diversity and inclusion perspective as you grew through your career. As in, you might have different views maybe 10 years ago, perhaps earlier. How has that changed for you?
I'd say I probably haven't had different views. I've always been wedded to the concept of fairness and equity. It's something which, from a family perspective, was instilled upon us as children. I grew up overseas outside of the UK. My entire life, I had a very exposed background to cultural diversity. And that was something which, from a family perspective, was highly respected. And therefore, I probably always had this intrinsic belief that everybody has the same rights to access the opportunities. I think what I've learned as a global leader and seeing those changes from country to country and over the years is the sensitivity towards that confidence or that knowledge, that belief, and how that actually translates into conversation. I think the biggest thing I've learned is the very stark difference between cultural sensitivity and the culture of the organizations that we work within, and the culture of compliance, the culture of inclusion, the culture of diversity. And by that, I mean that lots of things get done in very specific ways in very different parts of the world. And the default is very often, but that's just how things work here. And that's just how we do things here. And we're not ready for that yet. And so I think a big change over the last 10 years is 10 years ago, we probably used to say, well, okay, we need to step away from this conversation because it's going to make somebody feel uncomfortable, or we need to step away from this conversation because I don't want to push my views onto somebody else. But then actually you bring that back to our organization's cultures, the things that bind us and the commitments that we have to move forward together. What's changed is that I've now got a new language with people when they say to me, but that's just not the same as it is here. We don't do things that way. And the last panel used the question, and this is the question you have to go in with all the time, is why is it any different? Why can't it be different from the way that things are today? So I think as a global leader, it's not so much that what I believe in has changed, it's probably how have I approached the conversation that's changed.
And that's quite interesting, and it kind of neatly leads me on to the, I suppose, linkage to SEER, right? So SEER and the IAF and conduct standards set out prescribed responsibilities, and it sets out conduct standards, which links neatly back, I think, to culture of an organization. Where do you see that in terms of the diversity and inclusion agenda sitting within prescribed responsibilities or conduct standards? But also, what do you see as the role of the senior executives?
It's a combination of both, and it has to be, but it's like everything in our day lives and day jobs. It's a combination of both. You can't just have the policy and tell people these are the rules and this is what you have to do. So it's a set of prescriptions, but you also can't just have a very good tone from the top from the CEO who says we're going to have a diverse and inclusive workspace where everybody has the ability to achieve their potential, full stop, walk away and do nothing about that. So I think it's absolutely a combination of both things. And we tend to talk about it and think about it at 3 levels. We have the macro, we have the management, and we have the micro level. And the macro is about your tone from the top. It's about your strategy. It's about your mega message, not only to your staff, to your colleagues, to your fellow leadership team members, it's about to your market as well. It's that we are a place that offers opportunities for everybody, that does co-develop and work with everybody to meet their full potential, etc. It's about that big strategic message, knowing that that drives outcomes. It's then about the management piece, which is about your prescription. It's about having the policies. It's about having the training programs in place. It's about having the measures and the data to understand, has a diverse pool of people got the same access? So if you've got training programs, or if you've got experience opportunities for, say, secondments to go into other departments or even into other parts of the business or into other countries, who's always getting those opportunities? Is it the same people over and over again? Or have you got the data to show you that it's a diverse group of people? Then there's the micro level, and that's the individual personal responsibility. That's the personal responsibility on each and every single one of us when we're running team meetings. To say to somebody, you know, Dermot, you've been a bit quiet today. Everything all right? But that's because you know and you understand a little bit about Dermot, and you know that actually in a room full of people of this type, Dermot might actually regress and feel a little bit more insular in those circumstances. It's about calling out to somebody, not in a bad way and in a nasty way, but after the meeting, when you pull them aside and you say to them, you know that joke you made in there about the car that he drives is so gay? Yeah, he's gay. You just said the wrong thing. And I know that you didn't mean to cause offense, but you've got to think more. So these micro responsibilities that we have to call out behavior and to influence and lead by example, they're the things that then reinforce the management and the macro. But then it goes down as well. The people who are actually behaving and on a micro level in the way that you want them to, recognize it, reward it, celebrate it, repeat it, and people will change behaviors. So it's not one or the other. It can't be, but when's life ever been about one thing?
Yeah. And I really like those thoughts on the micro, because one of the approaches I've often looked at from a compliance perspective, yes, you can communicate things out, but it's often observing the stakeholders you're engaging with and whether they're truly absorbing and listening to take away and implement into practice. And I think to your piece there, involving others in the conversation where perhaps they're a little bit more withdrawn, but where I suppose it's providing that encouragement to share those views, because they may look at something with a different lens to how you or I would look at it. So if you're looking at a piece of regulation change, somebody might have a different interpretation of a particular article within CRR in terms of how that would practically implement. So I think it's observing the room, as we all should be doing. We do it with our clients when we're onboarding, so why should it be any different understanding our internal stakeholders?
That putting the team together piece is really important, right? So if we go back to that last conversation, I drive my team absolutely crackers because I have vision around tech, but I don't have ability around tech. But if I fill the room full of people like me and we've only ever got a vision, we're never coming up with anything. So you have to think about getting the right people in the room. And one of the unspokens around diversity these days is around age diversity. Tony made the observation that we're probably all born in the 70s and 80s, and that's probably true. Where are the people on your teams who are the bright young things who are just out of college that we're all scared of because they might know more than we do? They do about some things, but they don't about others. And so putting the young people with the tech experience, the insight, the ability on the team when you're trying to future-proof for tomorrow, and they're the ones you're going to hand it to, that's essential. So looking around the room and thinking about who's involved in the conversation starts with who do you put in the room in the first place. Hugely important.
And I couldn't agree more with you there. I think Tony touched on in the last session in terms of use of technology. Like there's so many different social media platforms, influencers out there, that cohort have a different skill set to what I grew up with. So I think, as you say, it's very important to pull that together. With the audience we have in the room, obviously, as compliance officers, we work actively with the business in terms of interpreting regulatory change, managing that, and ensuring that it appropriately embeds within our organizations. Catherine, from your perspective, are there natural read across that you can take from effectively implementing a regulatory change and also incorporate it into the successful implementation of a D&I agenda?
Yeah, I think there are. I mean, one of our best superpowers as compliance people, I like to say things like that because it makes me feel good, but one of our superpowers is the ability to think about the outcome and what you're trying to change. And we don't generally, I know we feel like it sometimes, but we don't generally just head into setting writing a set of rules and then figuring out right now how we're going to comply with them. We set about thinking about what are we trying to change, and then we set about writing the policies and the processes and the procedures that will underline the change that we're seeking to embed. Well, it's no different than from a DE&I perspective. So if we're looking at our organization and thinking, I don't have a diverse pool of people on my leadership team, I don't have a diverse pool of people in our innovation center or whatever else, if I'm not getting the level of response of change that I'm expecting, why is that? So asking that question about why, analyzing then what it is that you're trying to do, and then kick your best natural skill sets into action. Think about then how that changes or translates into a policy and a message and a code and values. Think about how that translates and changes into a set of training procedures. Think about how that translates into monitoring and actually checking in that the things that you expect to happen are happening. And then think about how that translates into the data and the reporting and the evidence that we put in front of leadership. One of the best pieces of evidence which we kind of got our hands on a couple of years ago was all around things like speed to market and retention for having better diversity within your organization. And there's some stats in there which are phenomenal. There's something like a 70% more likely to achieve the speed to market if you, in your chosen market, if you had a diverse pool of people that were representing. You were something like 19% higher retention of staff if you were setting up an organization or building an organization that has higher diversity. So when you've got those measures to sort of aim for, and then from a kind of a compliance and a bringing the benefit back to the business perspective, go find those measures for your own organizations and approach it very methodically, like we would any other challenge.
To follow from that, compliance officers love to look at lessons learned, right? So maybe if you could share any things you've seen senior leaders do badly so that collectively we can learn from that so that we don't make the same mistakes in terms of D&I.
Yeah, I think that the biggest bad is the lack of authenticity, the winging it, right? You know, when somebody stands up and says to you, I'm really excited to be here today. Oh, really? Tell your face. Because no, if you're really excited to do something, you're really excited to do something. You're genuine, there's an authenticity, there's a fire in your belly that you actually really want to do something. Well, something that's exactly the same from a DE&I perspective. The worst people that you see talk about DE&I in a leadership role or capacity is when they say to you, I believe that the best thing for our organization is to have a diverse pool of people. We're going to be really inclusive of people with very different backgrounds, very different cognitive ways of thinking, different experiences, different views of the future. This is going to be transformative for our business. Now we're going to have a panel discussion with our leadership team, and every single person on the leadership team looks and feels the same as your CEO. And no offense to the gents in the room, but we tend to refer to you as the pale male stales. And we love you, but could you pepper it with a few younger people, females, etc.? So from a leadership perspective, what do you see when you get it wrong? It's a lack of authenticity and a lack of walking the walk as opposed to talking the talk. And I'm sorry, but you see it a lot, right? The flip side of that then has to be that you can see people doing it really well. And people do it best when they genuinely understand that there is a business reason to this, but there is also a human commitment that you're making to people on a personal level. They understand that this is about people's lives and representation. They also understand that this actually has the ability to drive a message outside of the walls of the organization that they work within or lead. And therefore they actually walk the walk, and they put people of diverse backgrounds and different experiences and different futures into their circle to demonstrate that to people.
I think that's a hugely important message, and I 100% am supportive of it. And I think when I look at it, I've got 2 young kids, they're just starting out on their journey through school. My understanding in the school environment, we're encouraging that inclusivity. And I think when it comes to how our staff identify, if you translate it to schools, they're just like, yes, it's just Kate, Karen, or Diarmid, or whoever in the school. They're just another one of their friends. So I think it's important that, to your point, that messaging continues in the organization, and it is authentic.
But if you think about the future-proofing piece as well, couple of stats for you. 63% of people who identify as LGBTQ will probably go back into the closet after university or third level education before entering the workplace because they are scared of what that may mean. So you've spent your entire life nurturing your children and your nieces, your nephews, your grandchildren, your friends' children, whoever, to be the best of themselves, to change the school environment, to make it more friendly, to make it more accepting and welcoming. And then you've put up this massive barrier where you've told them that the future is theirs. And then you've put this massive barrier up. They walk into the workplace and they're just not sure again if that is for them. And that is a massive step back for any individual, a massive step back. And that can take years to overcome as well. And it can be really detrimental on people's careers, but it can be really detrimental on the organization because you're potentially missing out on a good few years and potentially forever of that talent. The other one is that Gen Z currently will absolutely leave you if you do not create diverse workplaces. And it's not just diverse, it's inclusive and equitable workplaces as well. So there's a recent study that will show you and talk to you about the high levels of sort of responsiveness from Gen Zers, who will tell you that they will happily walk away from what they perceive to be their dream career if they're not getting that inclusion. So we're making our part of what is a lifelong commitment to everybody, that regardless of age, gender, sexual orientation, experience, ability, etc., that you have the right and the ability to participate in society at its fullest. And that portion of it, or a portion of it, is your workplace.
You touched on going back in the closet between college and work life. So organizations can set their missions, their values, they can signal as to how they support the diversity, the pride agenda, LGBTQ+ community. But what is it that you think that is resulting in those people going back within the closet?
On a personal level, and I don't mind sharing this story because I've shared it before, but on a personal level, one of the reasons I left London was because I came out at work having gone into the closet after university, where I was out, in, out, shake it all about, couldn't figure out what was going on. But somebody at work at the time found out and heard that I was gay, and he was a senior member of our team, and he came up and he put his arm around me in the pub and he said, "So I hear you're gay." And I was, oh, world crashing around me, what's going to happen next? And his next sentence started with, "That's okay." And I felt this wave of release flow over me because everything was going to be okay, because I was a young professional in London. They were already talking to me about fast tracking to partnership. I was such a geek. We talk about being a geek. I was such a geek. I knew it. My first coming out to my parents was when I was 8, and I told them I wanted to be an accountant. My second coming out was when I was 14, and I told them I was gay. I think they found the first one hardest than the second one, but we got there. But he said to me, "That's okay." And I thought, found my tribe, I'll be okay. And he finished his sentence, "I'll fix you." I left London, I left that job, I left that career, I left what I thought was going to be my future as a partner in a different firm than I'm with now, I'll hasten to add. I left 8-year-old me at the pub going, now what do I do? And then I moved here and I settled, etc., etc. And eventually, and after a couple of years in industry, I went back to the practice and back to the profession. And I was thinking about it a lot afterwards. And you've asked, what did they miss? I missed a chunk of my life. I missed a chunk of my life where I missed that opportunity to learn and grow. And that's mainly the industry that most of us in. If we're in people industries, we're in apprenticeship models, and you need to continue to learn and grow. So I took myself out of that for a bit, and that impacted, and I had to catch up. But if I'm less personal and less personally reflective about it, shame on them, because they've missed out on the opportunity to have somebody advocate for their organization the way I advocate for EY, the way that I now work as a professional across 400,000 people building compliance solutions for 153 countries, leading financial crime efforts in 120 of those. Bad luck on you guys for missing that opportunity to have me sitting at your table, because you haven't grown the same way that EY has. You haven't got the solutions that we have. You haven't got the pool of talent looking to work with you the way that they look to work with us. So I hope that somewhere someone is sitting having a reflection on the things that they said 25 years ago and how things could be different from them, because whether I knew it or not at the time, it's worked out, but it took a chunk of my time to refigure it out.
Yeah. And for those in the room, you may not have seen my reaction. It's the first time I've actually heard that story from Catherine, but the "that's okay" piece kind of resonated with me, going, where do you get off a little bit in terms of with that? Just treat the person who they are. I think to your piece in terms of what they've missed out on, I think that is exactly the right way to look at it. Because when I look at it, everybody's been influenced in different ways throughout their life, their growth. Some of the LGBT community have faced challenges that none of us will ever face. But it's how we're going to extract the benefits from that group and that cohort, and it's the organizations that lose out.
Yeah, and I want to be very clear. I mean, I have my life, my lived experience, my story, and the dominant part, I suppose, in my diversity strands of all of the things which I feel potentially other people feel make me different is being gay. But it's not all about that. And I know that some organizations, and especially leaders who are embarking on this conversation for the first time, worry that it's all a focus on one thing. It's all a focus on gender, or it's all a focus on LGBTQ. Strip away any of the labels of which diversity strand you're thinking about. All aspects of diversity are incredibly important, and no one person has one difference. I joked at the beginning, I'm English in Ireland, I'm a woman in a predominantly male industry, I am dyslexic, I am gay, I am all of these things, but at the end of the day, strip all that back, and I'm just me. And we have to create the ability where people can walk into the buildings and be just them and bring all of that brilliance. My next level of challenge to everybody around this sort of area, and especially sort of, I think in our industry, is we've really got to think about cognitive difference, and we've got to think about sort of physical difference as well, and accessibility. We talk a lot about tech and the power of tech in our solutions from a compliance and a fin crime perspective. It's no good if the people who are in our organizations who are partially impaired visually or deaf or whatever can't access and use that tech, and yet those technologies out there can be hugely transformative for people with physical disabilities to bring the best of themselves into our solutions. So it's not just about setting up employee resource groups and having pride flags and having women's networks, etc. It is about tangible business solutions, which mean that if we think about all of those different aspects of diversity and changing our business environments, it comes right back to your point at the very opening, Dermot, is you can change your outcomes, for sure.
One of the pieces I want to touch on, and if there are any questions, please do flag, because I'm keen to give that opportunity, is the role of mentorship. And in my day-to-day job, through this Pride sponsorship within City, we have this concept of reverse mentorship, where the members of the community will act as the mentors to the senior management in the organization. So the senior managers gain that benefit from learning the journey that the community has come through, but also that will support those members on their journey. What's your view on the benefits of mentorship?
So massive. I mean, there's first of all that school of thought, if I see it, I can become it. Well, I firmly believe that if I can learn it, I can become it. If I can talk about it, therefore I can learn it, and therefore I can become it. So it's not just about visual representation. It's about having then the opportunity to discuss, learn, etc. And mentorship is a massive, massive part of that. One of the things which most people will get out of from a mentoring relationship is just being able to ask that question: how, why, what can I do differently? What can I learn from your experience? But then there is that reverse mentorship piece, which is really important as well, because if you are a person who is perceived to have a difference, and therefore in yourself you are a person who you feel needs to break through and crack into, then I'm the only one who knows how I feel about what I need to crack into. Don't decide for me what's important for my community, what's important for the women at work. As a senior male, middle class, middle-aged man, don't decide, able-bodied, don't decide for all the people of difference what it is you need. Your reverse mentoring gives you the ability to listen and understand what's really important to those different communities, so that then you can actually build the appropriate responses to those, because it's a waste of time and money to build the response that you think somebody else needs, when actually that's not what I need at all. What I really need is different tech, different experience, different conversation, and reverse mentoring as well. You know, the mentoring is great, but the reverse mentoring is more important, because it means that the business is responsive to the needs of people with difference.
Absolutely. So conscious the clock in front of me is ticking down, I'm conscious we're between you and lunch. I do want to offer the opportunity if anybody has a question they would like to raise. Oh, Claudette, I think.
So I just wanted to say thank you for being so authentic as well as transparent on your own personal journey. Catherine, for you, just as a global compliance leader, what advice would you give to those who are starting out in compliance, especially those from underrepresented groups?
So will I repeat the question just for the room, because I'm conscious some might have heard. What advice would Catherine give to somebody starting out their career in compliance from underrepresented groups?
Don't be shy about the fact that you have a passion for or an interest in compliance. Loads of us throughout our careers have probably said, yes, I work in compliance, and you put your head down and whatever. Be proud about it, and embrace that you want this career, because it is a hugely important career, and it's hugely transformative for our organizations and for the societies, communities we work in. So first of all, I'd say to any young compliance or person wanting to enter compliance, regardless of their difference, enjoy it, embrace it, don't be shy about it, and go for it. Absolutely. Then I would say that somebody with diverse background, I would then say and finish off with, and that is going to be your superpower that's going to make you exceptional in a compliance role. Because one of the things which people of difference and our younger generations these days all demand and think about quite a lot is concepts of fairness, equity, justice, trust, accountability. Well, if they're not some of the things that we strive for from a compliance perspective, then you've missed the point on what compliance and what DE&I is and where the marriage is. Because everything we do from a day-to-day perspective is about trust, accountability. It's about fairness, it's about equity, and that makes somebody of difference and young people entering the profession hugely naturally connected to our purpose. And that's why I'd say to them, go for it, you will be exceptional, and you're absolutely the right person for the job.
Conscious for, oh, we've one more question. Great, that we have time. So I'll go to the room. I think it's down the back.
Hello there.
Hi.
It is working. Stand up just so you can see me. Thank you so much for that. Just in terms of organisations and trying to encourage inclusion, particularly across the whole span of different experiences and underrepresented communities, we do a lot of data protection training. And one of the first things that I say, and it's much easier in the financial services context, is that if you have a culture of confidentiality, it's often a good starting point in terms of having a baseline to help with data protection, because you don't have people conversing about things they shouldn't be talking about in the first place because they're keeping it kind of narrow. So just trying to take that to the D&I space. You know, we talk about having committees and representation, policies, all of those sorts of things. But for entities that aren't so advanced in their journeys, is there any kind of comparable baseline or single thing that all entities could have in place to try to encourage that, you know, further representation? Is it focusing on the tangible solutions that are unique to the challenges of every human and focusing on that, or is it having the hiring manager or the HR person being fully attuned to biases and avoiding situations where they're discounting a candidate for reasons that may not be appropriate? I've seen HR consultants use technology to remove CVs from desks of managers, and it has actually negatively impacted people. So I appreciate that's a very broad question, but if you did have an indication of what might help broadly for entities regardless of size, I'd be very grateful to hear that.
So thanks for the question. I think the first thing I want to say, though, is the difference between confidentiality and creating an open environment and a diverse environment. Absolutely, there is a lot about what we're talking about, which is deeply personal and individual to people, and they may want to keep that confidential. They might not want to share their diversity with you. Diversity and inclusion is not about exposure and forcing people into the conversation. Diversity and inclusion is about creating an environment that when they are ready to step into the environment, it is there, warm, ready, and waiting for them. And that when they bring something of themselves out to the organization, that the organization doesn't react in any way other than, fantastic, you're still part of us. So there's a subtle and important piece about the conflict between confidentiality and inclusion. In terms of what can you do, I think if your journey is at such an early stage of not having any of these middle management and micro tips, you've got to start with that macro. What do you actually want to be known for as an organization in terms of your inclusion commitment, and why are you doing this? Do you have a particular pool of people that you're not accessing that you need to access? And therefore is your message that you are open to recruitment from a diverse pool of people, and then you push it down with the macro, which is with the management, to have the policy and the business relationships with your recruitment agents, and do you set the tone with them about the expectations? And then do you move into the micro, which actually starts to say, well, now I want to see the CVs of people from a more diverse pool of people. So I think you without taking on the ocean and trying to do too much, if we're at a really early stage of this journey, you've got to think about the 2 or 3 things that are going to make the most significant difference. And you've got to start each of those things with a macro, a management, and a micro. If you just start all three things with a macro, nothing will translate into the management and the micro. So recruitment is a great place to start if retention or diverse pool of brains in the room is the problem. Maybe that's not the problem though. Maybe the problem actually is around culture and workplace ethics, etc. In which case then you're going to have a very different response, which is around training, mentorship, and reverse mentorship. So I think the first thing you have to do is really figure out what is the problem you're trying to solve for. And then there are individual sort of strategies for each of those. We could be here for a day.
Yeah, and I might add to it, I agree with Catherine completely. It's a journey.
Yeah.
And there's lots of different steps along that journey. If it's the hiring practices, do you have a diverse panel of interviewers? Do you have diversity in terms of who's seeing the CVs that come in the door? It's the pronouns. Again, it's not forcing the environment. It's encouraging people to be themselves and creating the environment that people wish to put out there that they identify as he,
Yeah.
him, his.
I'll give you one really quick practical tip. One thing we did introduced about 5 or 6 years ago, maybe even a little earlier. At EY in Ireland, we will not promote any man into a director role unless there is a credible female candidate also in the pipeline and in the mix. That's not to say that we won't give a man a job if he is the best qualified. And that's not to say that it's stats based around one guy in, then the next one has to be a female. It's about your pool that you're looking into to make sure you're awarding roles and outcomes on a merit based and not on a gender based for either reason. So you're not just going with the same person who's there before. You're actually opening up your gender pool. So we have this rule: no male will be promoted unless there was a credible female candidate in the running for the role also. And that's been transformative. That's changed things massively. We also changed as well our interview paneling for partner promotes as well. They have to have females on the partner panel. So you can do some really small practical things to Dermot's point.
Guys, I'm conscious we're
now definitely over time.
But look, I'm not apologetic about it. I think it was very useful. I do want to thank Catherine for her time and being very open and transparent. I think it's been of benefit to everybody in the room and everybody's joined us online.
Thank you, Dermot. Thank you. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you, Dermot and Catherine. And Catherine, I couldn't agree more. It's great to be in a room where you can be unapologetically a compliance officer. I think everyone will agree, hugely impactful words there. And thank you to Catherine for sharing so generously. Dermot also reminded me to mention that the Compliance Institute has a mentorship programme up and running now, and really positive feedback so far. So look out for opportunities to participate in that into next year. That's it for me and the first half of our conference. For the afternoon session, I'll be handing over to Claudette White, fellow council member, to host the afternoon session. Lunch today is generously sponsored by Lincoln Recruitment, so thanks to Lincoln. We just ask everyone to be back in the room around 1:30, please. And thanks everyone for your attention this morning, and enjoy your lunch.